Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peace Podcast. This is just let me rewire my survival mode, whatever that looks like. And so we get into these spaces where we are reacting to things, we have built habits in response to things, and we tell ourselves that we don't want to do it anymore, but we often wonder, why can't I stop myself from doing the thing that I no longer want to do? And the reality is that many of us believe that we are anxious or overwhelmed or emotionally reactive because something is wrong with us. And I'm here to tell you the one sentence of truth today. And if you hear nothing else, hear this: nothing is wrong with you. Your nervous system is stuck in survival mode, and it is going to stay that way until we teach it a different pattern of behavior. So we're going to take a look at the neuroscience of why survival responses even exist in the first place, how trauma wires our brain for protection, and then what helps the body to relearn those areas of safety. Because when we're born into the world, we're not born into the world feeling unsafe. Something has to have reacted in our space with our normal nature of feeling safe to make us feel unsafe. And when that happens over time, progressively and repeatedly, then we start to develop those survival habits. And even when we're out of the spaces that made us feel unsafe, those habits are the only thing that we know because we developed them at such an early phase of life. So something that we have to understand is the research. And there are a lot of psychologists, there are a lot of brain research doctors who really have delved into this. I'm only going to give you the surface level because there's so much information. But what I want you to understand is you're not alone. There are so many people who are experiencing this same thing that they've done copious amounts of research on it. And there are methods to retrain your brain to do something different. Your brain is wired to prioritize safety over happiness, over joy, over anything else. So if you are in a space where you're wondering, why can't I experience joy? It's worth looking into what you're trying to keep yourself safe from. And a lot of times when we're overwhelmed or we're experiencing a lot of fear, we do things to keep ourselves safe, and then we get stuck in the pits of that and we start to feel like we haven't experienced joy in quite some time. And according to neuroscientist Rick Hanson, the brain can evolve with a negative bias, meaning that it scans for threats more than safety. And even small stressors, when you're scanning for threats, it's kind of like, I've explained this to you before in a earlier pod, but it's kind of like when you really like a car and you start to see more of it. Your brain does that. There isn't just more of those cars, or there aren't just more of those cars driving around on the roads, but your brain knows that you have focused on that thing or you desire that thing, so you start to notice it more. The same thing happens when we have a negativity bias. We start to notice the threats more than the safety. So even small stressors can signal your fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. As soon as you feel like a space isn't safe, or a person isn't safe, or a scenario or situation isn't safe, you fall into one of those responses. So you either flee the situation or you become argumentative toward the situation. Whatever it is that is your action of habit is what you go back into. But your brain isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to protect you. So in your past, those same behaviors have protected you. So currently, your brain goes back to what it knows and it uses those same things to protect you as well. We've talked before about how your fight response is supposed to kick into action when danger is actually there. There's a bear in the woods, there's, a car accident, and you need to jump into high gear. Your brain is supposed to do that. It is protecting you, it is protecting the people that you love, and so that is its natural inclination, is to protect. But your brain also does that when you perceive a threat, even if it's not there. And because you are in your negativity bias, you're scanning for threats and you're not necessarily looking for the positive things, then you're starting to see more threats and you're starting to react in more of those responses. So your flight tells you, I have to leave this situation. I have to get away from this person. I have to get out of this environment. Even if there isn't an actual threat there, it's just kind of your brain telling you, we've seen this before, and before it was unsafe. So now we're going to connect this current situation to what we know from our past, and we're going to tell you that that's not safe either. Freeze is just exactly what it is, what it says. You're freezing in your space. You might dysregulate and go into a space where you're just internally going through. Your brain is protecting itself by going to something that distracts you, or your brain is telling you to go to your phone because it distracts you and you're frozen. You can't do anything. You can't have the conversation, but you also can't move from the space. And then fawn is when you just try to people please everything around you. You try to be super kind so people don't judge you or feel differently about you. Again, all of those things are happening because your brain is doing what it was designed to do, which is to protect you. And if that is what you developed in childhood, it continues until you react upon it. The other thing that we have to know about the research is that trauma sensitizes the amygdala. And there's research done that shows that trauma can cause the amygdala, which is your threat detector, basically the part of your brain that recognizes threat, to actually become hyperactive. And when it does, you start to experience emotional reactivity, anxiety, constant vigilance and or hypervigilance, difficulty relaxing, and people in survival mode feel unsafe even when life is objectively stable. Like there's not a real threat. There just might be some little things happening that are going to end soon. They may be chaotic, but because there's so many of them, if anything disrupts the calm pattern or the safe pattern or the not stressful pattern of life, it could be something as simple as an accident, being on the road and now you're late for work. It could be something like spilled milk in the kitchen after you've already dealt with a ton of things that day. But it basically amplifies the threat in that space because your amygdala is always on high alert. So it has become a part of your brain that perceives a lot of things that aren't actually threats as threats because your trauma over time has sensitized that part of your brain. So because it's used to threats, it perceives more threats, and the more threats that it perceives, the more you start to have those patterns of behavior like emotional reactivity and anxiety, constant vigilance and difficulty relaxing. And I had an anxiety attack last week. Something that you'll know is that healing is not a linear journey. I haven't had an anxiety attack in probably over a year. Actually, I had 2 of them in 1 week. And when someone asked me why, I said I didn't know. Because the thing about the way generalized anxiety works is that you don't necessarily know in the moment what has caused it to happen. In fact, the one that I had, the more intense one was I was sleeping. So I fell asleep and I woke up and I was in the middle of an anxiety attack. I don't know why it happened in the moment. I wasn't thinking about anything consciously because I was asleep. But it happened because that part of my brain, whatever I was thinking about when I was sleeping, was telling me that there was a threat. And then that threat intensified when I was awake because I wasn't fully coherent. So all of the things that were happening in my body the sweats and the heart racing and the not being able to really feel my extremities or kind of go numb because all of your oxygen is going to your heart because your heart is pumping so quickly. It's a whole thing. I know logically why it happens. But at the time, I can't explain it because it's just something that happens to me. But I also know, based on the research, that anxiety is happening because my threat, part of my brain is telling me that there are threats that aren't actually there. It is making things hyperbole. They are just hyper exaggerated when it doesn't actually exist as a threat that way. But that happens because that part of my brain has been on full tilt for so long in my life that if something is seemingly unsafe, then it goes into this response that says there's a threat, now you have anxiety. And even when life isn't 100% stable right now because I do have a ton of things going on, buying a house, selling a house, that's enough in itself, but it doesn't see the stable, it sees the threat. Also, your nervous system, it really responds to repetition. So it learns patterns through repetition. And if you look at polyvagal theory, you'll understand that your nervous system constantly scans for threats and danger through neuroception. And when it does that, when you grow up in an unpredictable environment, your body learns that safety is temporary, that survival is your default setting, and your nervous system is looking for patterns because that has been what's repeated. And so if you grew up in a space and you lived in an environment where the threats were pretty consistent, then your brain realizes that that's going to repeat itself. So because it knows that that's going to repeat itself, your nervous system kind of follows. So it says, okay, I'm going to consistently scan for danger because I know there's more danger than there is calm. And when I scan for danger, I'm going to do this thing because it has been what has kept me safe thus far. Anxiety doesn't seem like it can keep you safe, but also when you think about it, anxiety is this overthinking. So your brain is telling you that if you are hyper vigilant, you're going to find the threat before it exists and you're going to be able to create a solution for it before it exists. And that can cause an anxiety attack and all the other bodily responses, but it's your brain telling you that you can keep yourself safe if you think about all the possible threats that could be happening before they happen. And so when your nervous system learns the pattern through that repetition, then it is in a constant state of survival mode because it believes that mode that you have developed over time is what is going to keep you safe. Now, the good news is there is opportunity for healing. And it's not just learning that these things exist, because I can tell you that I have been to therapy. I know about these things. I've listened to podcasts on repeat about how these theories and this research shows up in other people's experiences and my own. And just knowing is not enough because your brain doesn't rely on what you know when you're in a series of threats. It relies on what you've known and what you've done and what you've proven has worked. So your instinct, which may be your survival mode, that's not necessarily a good pattern, but your instinct tells you to go back to what you've done before and disregard all of the new information because that new information has not proven that it can keep you safe. So when we're in a space where we're ready to heal and we want to do things differently, because our nervous system is involved and our brain is involved and patterns of behavior that were learned in childhood are involved, we have to retrain our body to do something different. And research in trauma therapy shows that healing happens when your nervous system actually experiences repeated safety signals. So remember how we talked about earlier that your nervous system gets so used to those repeated danger signals that it reverts back to what worked when you were a child, because it knows that that kept you safe then, and it has a pattern to prove that it can keep you safe now, even if the danger isn't as imminent now as it was then. So the only way to get your nervous system to rely on something different and to create new instincts is to create new safety signals. The way that we do that is breath work, grounding, emotional awareness, creating safe relationships. You can't think your way out of survival mode. You can't learn your way out of survival mode. You can't talk your way out of survival mode. All of those things bring it to light, and it's a beautiful process. And I'm not saying don't do those things. Please continue to do those things, because the more you know, the more it helps you to rely on that in experiences where you don't necessarily have a nervous system response, but you're trying to think through something. That information is imperative during those situations so that you can think through the process. But when your brain has already told you you're in threat and your body has already responded with its normal pattern of behavior, your body's not going to revert to what you know. It's going to revert to what you've done. And so the only way that you can work yourself out of survival mode is to show your body what it looks like to be safe. It's to change that pattern of negativity bias into a pattern of positivity bias, where you're looking more for the safety instead of the threat, where your brain starts to notice safety more than it notices the threat. It won't put you in a space, because I know that this was a worry that I had. Well, what if I get so biased on the positivity that I miss the threats? It won't work you into a space that you won't perceive real threats. In fact, when you focus on more of the safety signals and create more of those safety signals in your body, you actually free up space for your brain to function the way that it needs to, instead of having your amygdala just really going hypervigilant, looking for the threats. And instead of having your the neurons and the nerves in your brain going to things that don't exist, you actually are creating clarity so that you can think through processes more clearly. So we have to think about, well, what does that breath work look like? What does the grounding look like? What does emotional awareness look like? What does creating safe relationships look like? Well, part of it is learning to trust that you can do something different, that you can trust yourself to do something different. I use prayer and repeated scripture too, because in those moments where I don't trust myself, I trust God. So I'm always, focused on trusting him and focused on the scripture. But when I can't talk myself out of what I'm overthinking and perceiving as a threat, when I quote the scripture or when I start to pray, it will help me to realize that I'm not in control, but I don't have to trust me. I can trust him. Breath work. If you roll back to some of my previous shorts, where I talk about how to do breath work, and if you Google it, it'll bring you to several different processes of breath work. But it's learning the, breathing in for 8, breathing out for 8, breathing in for 4, breathing out for 8. It's really just slowing down your breathing. And in fact, the breath work that I use when I'm talking myself out of an anxiety attack is the same breath work that I use to get myself into a state of calm when I'm not having an anxiety attack. And perhaps had I been using that, because I hadn't been focusing as much on that, had I been using in the days prior, I wouldn't have had the anxiety attack and needed it then. But it's really slowing down your breath. It's taking cleansing breaths so that you're able to just slow down the heart rate, slow down the way that your body is processing all of the things that you're perceiving in your life. Maybe you're not even thinking that they're threats yet, but waking up in the morning and doing that breath work helps you to slow all of that down before it even starts to get hypervigilant, because if you know it probably will. Grounding is really just going outside and putting your feet on the ground. And if you can't get outside, you can certainly do it in the space that you're in. Sometimes sitting on the ground can help as well. And it's really just recognizing that you're safe, and that grounding when you're outside actually is a whole electric process that happens in your body. I have a grounding sheet on my bed where the grounding wire comes out of the outlet, and it really processes in your body and helps to get rid of the inflammation, which there's whole research on that too. But it's calming yourself and putting yourself back into a space where your body knows it's safe and you know you're safe. Emotional awareness is just realizing when you are perceiving threats that aren't there, realizing when you're having fear that you maybe don't necessarily need to have. It's just being conscious of your emotional reaction to things and being able to say, I don't have to feel that right now. Stopping the emotion in its tracks before it turns into something that makes you feel unsafe. Safe relationships is probably going to be the hardest one, because when you don't trust yourself and when you have a pattern of unsafe and unhealthy relationships, it's really hard to recognize the safe ones. But if you are able to jot down what would make you feel safe in relationship, then when you're in the spaces where you're trying to heal, you can say, I trust myself to see that this isn't safe, and do it with logic instead of letting your brain just do it in survival mode, because survival mode will talk you into things that don't exist. And just know that many high-functioning people are operating from survival mode. It's not just you. It's not just a one-off because of what you experience. People can appear to be successful, but internally they're exhausted or emotionally overwhelmed because they are constantly dealing with the hypervigilance and just the exhaustion of always being on, because you're perceiving threats, which means that you have to respond to those threats. You know, I have probably ignored my intuition more times than not in my life. And I believe that intuition has been my alignment with my true self. And I have allowed myself to go into survival mode because I thought that I didn't know better, and that I was, making things up, and that, there were all these things that had been downloaded into me, and, it just a whole slew of things that we do when we realize that moment of enlightening comes, right? But there are also times where I have allowed myself to become super emotionally dysregulated, spiraling down the rabbit hole of emotion because I perceived a threat. I didn't want that threat to happen again. And so I had to fall back into old habits to ensure that thing wasn't happening. And then the threat didn't even exist in the first place. Sometimes we can do it when we're in new relationships, and our past relationships have shown us that this one thing that the person said, or this habit that you see that this new person now doing, means the same thing in this relationship as it meant in the past relationship, but it's not the same person, and those actions and behaviors and comments don't necessarily mean the same thing. Their intentions may not be the same. And so today I just encourage you to think about doing a daily safety reset, because when you train your body with those repeated safety signals, you will be able to default to that over perceiving the threat. So once a day, slow inhale for 4 seconds, slow exhale for 6 seconds, and look around and name 3 safe things in your environment. That is going to signal safety to your nervous system. Even if you don't believe that it exists, it will show you that safety does exist because you continue and repeat every day You might need to do it numerous times a day. You might need to do it when you have perceived a threat and now you need to rewrite that story by telling yourself that safety exists. But at least once a day, show your nervous system that there are things around you that are safe, that you can slow down your breathing, that you can actually recognize, touch, and be logical about things that are safe in your environment so that your brain will start to notice more of the safety than it does the threat. Because your nervous system may still feel like it's protecting you from things that you've already ended or exited, but healing isn't really about fixing yourself. It's about teaching your body that you are finally safe. And that's a great place to be when you're in this part of healing. But we have to know how our survival mode was started in the first place so that we can rewrite the story and rewire our nervous system to do something different. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I hope that this video helped for you to understand why you constantly are in survival mode and helped you to learn at least the pathway to begin rewiring your nervous system to no longer have to be in survival mode. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe to my pages, follow me on all socials, and share this message with somebody. It could just be the catalyst for change that they need to break free from the bondage that they're in, to surrender the feelings of constant perceived threat that they're going through, and to just live a life of full freedom from what they've experienced in their past. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.